My name is Werthmann. I'm a professor for landscape architecture at Hannover University in Germany. My lecture is titled Metropolis Non-Formal, 10 Things Designers Need to Work on. This lecture is really about more posing questions than giving definite answers. The situation on the planet is pretty much clear. There are around 6.5 billion people living on the planet today, and in 2050 there will be 9 billion. So we know that. We also know that out of these 6.5 right now, there are 3.6 billion living in cities. And we also know, or these are the projections, that in 2050 there will be 6.3 billion people living in cities, so it will double pretty much. It is also well known that there are right now, from our current urban population, 1 billion people are considered to live in slums. There's a definition by UN Habitat, and if you fulfill the definition, you are considered a slum dweller. And there are right now 1/3 of our urban population is considered to live in slum-like conditions. And in 2050, it will increase threefold to 3 billion. So when you look at the number, close to half of our urbanization will be informal. Another word for unplanned cities, cities that were constructed by the people because they could not find any proper housing that they could afford. So there's also another movement happening that is very interesting. There are right now about 1.5 billion people live in middle class. There's a definition by economists, that's the estimate. And the good news is that by 2050 the middle class will increase to 4.5 billion. So this is actually very good news. And when you look at the whole picture there, we have basically two movements, that we have more and more low-income people living in cities, so 3 billion people in the future. At the same time, people are moving out of poverty and moving up into middle class. And so everybody who will be in those 3 billion in the future, of course, has the right and deserves to be middle class. And so what can we do as designers that we enable this, but also that we at the same time not increase resource exploitation, because that's the big fear about the rising middle class that needs more and more products on the planet. So this is this intersection of people lifting out of poverty while not increasing resource exploitation is one of the big challenges we face in this century. We made a map at Harvard University where I taught before with students in order to get a picture of this situation that you saw with these graphs before. And we took the numbers of UN Habitat, and for each person that's considered a slum dweller, so we made, basically we listed them on the map. So each square here is 250,000 persons, and we arranged them in the form of the continents and the land sizes. So as you can see, Africa and India and China and Brazil have large populations, and they are also large in population itself. And when you look at the light orange squares, you have basically the projected for the next 7 years so-called slum dwellers that will move to the city and live in very low income conditions. So in 2020, 1.5 billion. And you see, it's mostly Africa, it's India and China, less so in Latin America. This is the current condition. And when we say we have to address as designers low-income population, this is roughly the geography we are talking about. So we cannot today, of course, find different ways of living in unplanned settlements. They range from small settlements of 50 to 2,000 to 3,000 residents, but there you can also find town-sized neighborhoods from 50 to 100,000, like this image shows Complexo de Alemão. And of course, there are very large informal self-planned, self-built cities on the planet, like in Mexico City, that reach up to 1 million people. So we are talking not anymore about any marginal urbanization. You cannot talk about it like that. If in the future half of our urbanization will be self-built, We're talking about mainstream urbanization. This is not a fringe phenomena, and so it has to be fully addressed by the design professions. It has to have equal weight as all the other so-called formal design curricula we develop in our schools. So in the past, cities and municipalities had different ways of dealing with self-guided construction. So one of the common and still existing strategies of cities is just to deny it and say, actually, yeah, we might have a couple of houses on the edge of the city, but it's not that important. And there are still a lot of city maps that they don't even show informal urbanization, and they are not even mapped in many countries. So this is the phase of denial. Then once those informal settlements or neighborhoods get in the way of plans of the city to do some improvements, build new infrastructure, or when they need formal housing space, there was a lot of projects that basically removed informal city dwellers from their homes. That was the phase of slum eradication. It still exists today on the planet, but many countries have moved away from this policy where people were often forcibly removed from their homes and then put into social housing that was often far away from the actual workplaces. So the third phase many cities are now working on was basically, it was tolerance. Basically, there were so many people living in informal settlements, they could not all be resettled. That's impossible. So city governments started to tolerate them. The next phase is improvement. This happens a lot in Latin America, but also in India and other parts of the country where I said, okay, let's make them into functioning neighborhoods and give them more basic services, infrastructure, school, health, etc., improve the settlements. And then the last step actually would be to anticipate them, because the governments on the planet, especially in those countries that will have a lot of informal growth, will not have the money to build housing for all the people who will move into the city in the next 40 years. So there has to be kind of a strategy and anticipation of many low-income people coming to the cities and how can they be accommodated. So I think designers need to focus on these two topics, improvement and anticipation. And I would like to give you 10 points that they have to work on, and actually there are already many of designers, architects, urban planners, landscape architects thinking about these topics. So the foremost topic is, of course, how we call these things. Some call them informal cities, sometimes they are called slums, etc. And we have to be clear of the terminology, because these are emergent cities that have a right to be there. And there are a lot of derogative terms, and we have to get better understanding of our knowledge how we call these cities. Some designers and planners have started just to call them neighborhoods, because this is just what they are. And it's just they had a different history how they came into the world. Then how do we understand the comprehension of these areas? So when we look at something like this picture that you see of houses, in each house a family lives there, they have aspirations, they have needs, they have a reason why they are there. So we have to understand these things. For us it might look like a harsh living condition there. For the people who live in there, they are in many cases full of hope for the future. And they see this often as something better than what they had before. So we have to comprehend these areas better. Then one of the basic ingredients, and everybody knows that, is collaboration. And it has to be on an eye-to-eye level, collaboration with the people who live in these areas. You cannot have any improvement or anticipatory projects without really talking to the people and having them a full active collaboration in the process. So we have to ensure that. There's a lot of talk about transdisciplinarity, and obviously in forming cities you have to have many different specialists working together. In informal settlements you have to also use the knowledge of the people who are there. So transdisciplinarity should not only be knowledge of an architect or landscape architect or engineer, it should be the knowledge of the people who live there as well. Then designing the process is as much as important the product. How we improve the areas as designers, how we help people there, how we anticipate future construction, is often more important than what is the end product. Then we have to understand basics. We should forget the basics that in the most low-income settlements, like in this one in Haiti after the earthquake, the most important things are food and water that the people need. I mean, we have to design for these things and actually have to develop decentralized infrastructures that allow these people to get food and water. Another point, all of our projects have to be income generating. The economy is a very important aspect of design. And on every project that one does in these areas, a designer has to ask themselves, do I create any long-term jobs and how could I do this? And all what we do have to be multifunctional. What you see here is, for example, a drainage basin in São Paulo that was built to keep the city from flooding. But it is right next to a so-called favela. That's what they're called in Brazil. And in the favela, there's very little open space, and right in front of them, they have this drainage hole. So we have to design infrastructure different in a multifunctional way, which is, again, a very transdisciplinary topic. Then all our solutions have to multi-scalar. What do I mean by that? We have to work from the individual house and property up to the city level, neighborhood level, up to the regional level and back. Because all our activities are connected. People trade goods, food comes in and goes out, water comes in and goes out, etc. So in order to understand this, we have to work our project through multiple scales. Just to look at the neighborhood is not enough, and that too often is that done on the improvement of informal areas that are treated as like cells that are independent from the rest of the city. This has to change. And then, of course, something that designers always are responsible for is beauty. We might find beauty in those areas, but the people there might also have a different, sometimes the same or a close understanding what is beautiful in the neighborhoods and how it could be brought more forward. And it's something, it's an incredible important element of self-esteem to have beautiful things in your vicinity, in your neighborhood. And I think designers should also be very cognizant about what is the specific beauty of a certain place that they want to interact with. So when you see all points together, so terminology, we have to think about that, how we understand these places, comprehension, collaboration, how do we collaborate with people, and there are many, many different forms right now, from crowdsourcing to all kinds of forms, and we have to explore that. Transdisciplinarity, that we work not only together with other disciplines, but also with the knowledge of the people who are there. The process, that's so important, that we have to design processes, how something is improved. We should not forget about basics, food and water. Everything has to be income generating that we do. The multifunctionality has to be given. There cannot be monofunctional solutions anymore in dense urban environments. And we have to think through all scales, so it has to be multi-scalar. And as I said, the last point is beauty, as I pointed out before. So I think these should be 10 things designers should think about when they work in low-income areas. It's again something where we have to learn, something where we have our young designers trained to, because if we just train them to work in so-called formal conditions, we leave out about almost 50% of our future urbanization. Thank you very much.